After the massacre of praying school children in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I've seen a lot of well-intended people advocate for better mental health care access and funding in America. As a mentally ill person myself and somebody who used to do social work, you will never hear me argue against better funding for mental health care. However, two things worry me. First, I only ever hear people talk about mental health care funding in the context of violence. And second, mentally ill people are not violent. According to this study and a couple like it, if you eliminated mental health as the primary cause of a crime, you would eliminate only 4% of crime. Being mentally ill is highly correlated with being the victim of a crime, both because of PTSD and anxiety disorders, and also because, people are violent toward minorities, but it just doesn't make you significantly more likely to be violent. There is some correlation between certain diagnoses and violence, like, for instance, schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, plus a substance abuse disorder tends to be a really bad combination for violence. Whereas if you have generalized anxiety disorder, you are at much lower risk of hurting anyone else. Anxious people just don't hurt people very often. For mass casualty gun violence events, having a mental health diagnosis before the incident is not a significant predicting factor. About 20% of those kinds of perpetrators have a mental health diagnosis, same as everybody else. Also, for the kinds of diagnoses you would expect somebody to have in the cases where mental health is a significant factor, people tend not to seek treatment for those. Like people who are antisocial, they don't go to the psychiatrist. They don't experience a lot of distress. If they don't see a problem with themselves, they're not going to go to a doctor. That's not to say there's nothing we can do. For instance, the vast majority of people who do commit these crimes are men. Most of them don't have a mental health history, but they do have a domestic violence history. They tend to be politically radical, by which I mean they are fascists and usually misogynists. Also, access to a gun is, of course, the biggest risk factor. What a lot of people do not want to come to terms with is that violence is often done by a rational mind in cold blood to gain a wanted outcome. A lot of people do not want to admit that misogyny in gun ownership is the problem because they don't want to give up their misogyny or their guns. It is much easier to offer thoughts and prayers and funding for mental health care that isn't coming than it is to look in the mirror. Liberals, every time you let them point away from themselves and at mentally ill people, you are letting them get away with something.